All right, so we're going to get started here so that way we can get finished on time. I want to thank all the candidates for joining. My name is Sean Farrell. I'm going to be your moderator today. Welcome to the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club City Council 7th Forum. The format today is as follows. We will have the candidate give 3 minutes for opening, 3 minutes per response, and 2 minutes for closing. We will cover the following topics: housing, education, criminal justice, and the economy. The order of candidates speaking has been chosen at random. First will be Marty Allen Cummings, followed by Daniel Cohen, Stacy Lynch, Lena Melendez, Corey Ortega, and should the other candidates join, Maria Ordonez, Sean Abreu, and Louis Tejada. We ask that the candidates please only post in the group chat when it's your turn. Also, please do not interrupt anyone else. Lastly, but certainly not least, I want to educate you all on something that I had the privilege of learning recently. I asked one of our candidates who uses they, them pronouns how I should properly address them, and they asked that I address them as mix. It's pronounced as MIX, mix. For those not familiar, mix is used as a title to refer to individuals who identify as non-binary. I admit my ignorance, but I am thankful for the opportunity to learn, and I'm honored to be able to inform others about what I learned. So thank you.
Thank you.
Without further ado, we are going to start with our first opening, Marty Allen Cummings. You have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marty Allen Cummings. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and thank you, Sean, for taking time to speak to me on the phone about it yesterday. We're all learning collectively, so I'm grateful for your phone call. So yeah, I'm running for District 7. I'm not a traditional candidate. You know, I've been a drag artist for almost my entire adult life, which is, you know, shown me what it's like to work in our small local businesses. Most drag artists work in locally owned bars and restaurants. So I know what it's like to live in a city that's increasing for the wealthy, gig to gig, paycheck to paycheck. And while this is not a traditional path to a candidacy, it's taught me about community organizing and community building and learning how to work with others. Many years ago, going to Occupy Wall Street and now taking to the streets to stand up against police brutality and for Black Lives Matter. And drag led me to organizations like the Ellie Fournier Center for homeless LGBTQ youth, the RDJ Refugee Center, the Trinity Place Center. It taught me about politics being local and how we have to get involved on the local level, block by block, which led me to joining the community board. So yeah, I'm not a traditional candidate, but I'm excited to bring a unique voice and perspective to the table of governance. Our campaign has been doing phone banks, PPE distributions, trash cleanups. We've raised over $75,000. We hit the matching funds goal back in December. We have an incredible amount of support of in-district donors. And not only have we been endorsed by people like, you know, Senators Rivera and Biaggi and Salazar and council members Van Bramer and Drum, but we've also had several community organizers, leaders, and tenant activists support and endorse our campaign. This is grassroots. I'm excited to bring a new perspective to City Hall, and I'm excited to work with you on that. So there go my dogs again, sorry. But no matter the outcome of this endorsement or election, I'm committed to still being on the streets working with you and for you to make sure that our city is one that's just and equitable for all. So thank you for having me today, and always good to see my colleagues and friends who are also running.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen.
Sean, I'm sorry, if you're putting up the time, if
Yes,
you could put it in front of you, because it disappears in the background.
Sure thing.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you for
disappeared. So I was like, is that my tie?
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you. Mr. Cohen. You're on mute.
Try that again. Good afternoon, friends. President Penny, Sean. Thank you, West Harlem Progressive Democrats, for this opportunity to talk with you. I'm running for City Council because I believe I have the most experience, energy, and ideas to help our community recover from this pandemic and grow anew. I'm the elected Democratic State Committeeman for the neighboring 69th Assembly District. I won overwhelmingly when I ran first in 2010, and have been reelected 5 times since then. I've been in the trenches with members of this club to elect Robert Jackson to the state Senate over an IDC Republican supporting candidate, and was gratified that we succeeded in 2018. I'm also a founder of the Progressive Caucus, one of the only voices of reform within the state party, and was the lead plaintiff suing the state in 2010 over the absurd district lines we have in New York. I am hopeful that we can correct the more egregiously drawn districts later this year, starting with Robert Jackson's. I grew up in rent-regulated housing, and I'm a lifelong resident of the district now 50 years. Today, I live in Morningside Heights with my wife and our son, Caleb, who is 8 years old and attends PS 452. As a proud New York City public school graduate and a public school parent serving on the school PTA, I've seen firsthand the struggles our schools face and why tackling them is so critical. Professionally, I've spent the last decade working for affordable housing not-for-profit organizations for almost the past 7 years with the Nonprofit Housing Partnership. Working in affordable housing, I've seen the urgency of the issue in the district and across the city. Under this mayor, the city has made a mess of affordable housing, in particular by not building in areas of greatest need, low-income housing for people who make less than $40,000 a year. So I proposed 1,000 new affordable units in the district on sites either owned or controlled by New York City. As a member of Community Board 9, I've advocated for 200 units of affordable housing in a community arts center in Hamilton Heights, 300 units of senior housing in Manhattan Valley, and 500 units of affordable housing in Manhattanville. I have also been educated on the critical importance of HDFC co-ops in the neighborhood and the city at large. I support the HDFC Coalition's plan for stabilizing the co-ops and look forward to working closely with them if I'm elected to the city council. I applaud those club members who led a community-based rezoning that will ensure that we are, what does that time say? Sorry.
It's supposed to be a minute. Doesn't come up
Okay.
very well. So I'll just do 1 minute.
All right. I applaud those club members who've led a community-based rezoning that will ensure we're not overwhelmed by luxury overdevelopment mid-district, a plan that will protect tenants in our neighborhood. And I should note that I have refused to accept any money from real estate developers so that my perspective on our land use is clear. As a board member of the Columbus Amsterdam Business Improvement District, I also know the importance of supporting local small businesses. I want to create a capital fund to help small companies start and restart as part of the COVID-19 recovery with targeted investment in minority and women-owned businesses. Next year, virtually the entire city government is changing, and new leadership must hold the police accountable, advocate for structural change to foster racial equity and LGBTQ justice, and protect the most vulnerable among us. To that end, I'm calling for the Office of the Inspector General to be an independent agency, give the City Council the power to advise and consent over the appointment of the police commissioner, and strengthen the Civilian Complaint Review Board so the commissioner does not have the final say on police misconduct. Ultimately, I believe that climate change is the biggest threat we face as a city, country, and planet. I'm committed to making New York City the standard for responding to global warming, as it will touch on every aspect of our lives: housing, schools, transportation, everything. We cannot have climate justice without fundamental changes in the way we operate. I'm grateful for West Harlem Dems for this time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lynch.
Hi, Sean. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I want to thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here. This is my home. My name is Stacy Lynch. I'm a daughter of Harlem, and I'm certainly a daughter of District 7. I was raised here, attended school here, and when it was time for me to attend college in Virginia or law school in Connecticut, I always ventured back home. Home for me isn't just the brick and mortar, but the people, the businesses, and culture that make this a vibrant community. And after working 7 years at City Hall, I'm coming back home. I'm coming back home to deal with inequity within our education system. I'm coming back home to advocate for police reform. I'm coming back home to push affordable housing. I'm coming back home to build coalitions and create policy for the people and by the people. But most importantly, I'm coming back home to win this for us. Thank you, Sean, again, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Ms. Melendez.
Hi, my name is Lena Melendez, and I am running for City Council District 7. I'm a native New Yorker. I was born and raised in the Heights. I went to public schools here, and I went to school. I trained as a social worker at Columbia University. I worked, right? I went to school here, and then I gave back to the community. I worked for over a decade in social work, outpatient and inpatient centers in and around Harlem, Inwood, Washington Heights. And I'm running because I believe that people from low income and working class backgrounds should be running for this office. And we should have a seat at the table at where the decisions that are being made about on what's going to impact our lives they're being made down at City Hall. I'm not a political insider. I'm not being funded by special interest groups. My background, as I said before, is in social work, so I tend to view problems that are from a systemic vantage point. I grew up in a single parent household, and I've lived many of the issues that continue to plague our low income communities. So it's not something that I studied in a book. I lived it. And I'm a housing activist organizer who's put my body on the line to fight against rezonings, to fight against to fight for the small businesses, the SBJSA, and more recently the rent stabilization bill for small businesses, and more recently I was involved in civil disobedience last October 1st for the cancel rent, eviction moratorium, and housing access voucher bills that we're trying to push through on the state level. So that's been my work in the community. I fought tooth and nail against one of the rezonings in Upper Manhattan. I recognize the flaws in our land use process. Firsthand, it was shocking to see, I thought that we could make a difference, but we couldn't. So there needs to be some major changes made to the process. In land use, that's something I'm very, very focused on, and I'm very passionate about, because if there's 3 pillars to racial injustice, it's housing, schools, and education. And so those are the things that are my top priorities.
Thank you. Mr. Ortega.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me, Sean Penny. Just quick intro. I started out as a daycare provider, a tenant organizer, eventually working for the New York State Assembly, and then starting and forming and being part of co-founder of this Democratic Club, all in West Harlem. Then I moved on to veteran organizations organizing on the national scale, and then back to advocating and lobbying for veteran-related legislation, and then eventually working as the executive director for the Black, Latino, Asian Caucus. That's basically my work experience. But let me say something, and I learned this from Dan at other clubs. The same way that I started and continue to work in West Harlem, when you supported me for president, when you supported me for district leader twice over, but I'm doing something different this time. I'm not seeking re-election for district leader, but hopefully, and somebody from West Harlem Dems to pick up that role and giving someone else the opportunity to fight for the districts as a partner to hopefully, if I make it to city council. The same way that we as a club, when I was part of the executive board and former president, organized block by block for county committees, creating new block association, and the creation of the platform committee, part of this club. That's what I want to continue doing as a council member for West Harlem. Now, while we have good candidates here that have good experience, Dan, Stacy, Marty, I'm making my decisions based on the experiences that I've had with this club in West Harlem. And I'm not trying to come back home, no shade, but I'm just saying my work has focused here. I'm not coming back home. I'm doubling down on my home, where I've fought and have experienced the issues that represent 70% of the communities of color in this district. 1 minute. And that's what I'm trying to do. I got a minute left, so let me just free ball. You know, we all have different experiences, but I grew up literally in the heart of this West Harlem district. And the experience that I have, while not unique, are literally tied to this specific region, West Harlem. And to rebalance inequities, you need a city council member that's experienced the majority of what not only the residents, but these club members, the West Harlem Dems have experienced. And that's what I want to fight for. I'm not necessarily looking for an endorsement, but I want to just convey what my position is if I were elected to city council. And if not me, I fully endorse ranked choice voting for Dan, Stacy, and Marty. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We turn now to our first topic, which is housing, starting with Mix Cummings. In regards to Mayor de Blasio's mandatory inclusionary housing program and its effectiveness, you said the program does not go far enough to require more affordable units be included in new developments or to define the level of affordability to suit the most vulnerable members of our community. My question to you is, should the program continue? And if so, how much further does the program need to go? And is this the best path towards solving homelessness?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I think we need to adjust how we're looking at housing in general in this city. We have a housing crisis long before the COVID pandemic, with 80,000 plus people experiencing homelessness. We now, the eviction moratorium's been extended, but what happens when that's run out and people have all this back rent, So our city, our mayor, I think Mayor de Blasio has failed our city in a lot of ways. So with this program, we need to go further to providing affordable housing and mixed income housing. And affordable housing needs to match what the AMI is for that area. So we're able to give everybody true affordable housing. And I believe in a city that has a 5% vacancy rate right now, there's no reason anybody should not have a place to live. Our city has the budget and has the resources to provide everyone with housing and make sure that people are able to keep their homes. And in doing this, we also have to create a pathway that's going to allow people to have home ownership and give people more of an opportunity to have access to this. Right now, our city is benefiting the wealthy and not everyday working people. So with this plan, we need to take it further. And I think the mayor has failed us in housing.
Thank you. Turning now to Mr. Cohen. On your website, it says that for affordable housing, one of the things we need to do is build and commit to a strong racial equity strategy to combat the historical racism in housing policy. What does your racial equity strategy look like?
So in this administration, and not just in this administration, but previous administrations, there's a tendency to build housing in areas where there's least resistance. And that's been often lower income communities and predominantly communities of color. My argument is that we should be moving towards areas where there are communities of opportunity for affordable housing, which in many cases are sort of middle income, predominantly white neighborhoods that have good transportation links. A good chunk of Queens has low density in terms of their of any housing, but would be much more viable for building more affordable housing and would also help diversify those neighborhoods from being 80%, 90% white into a more diverse community. The challenge for our housing policy is that we make decisions frequently based on what is benefiting developers as opposed to what's going to benefit a larger community, and trying to rectify some of the mistakes that we've made in the past. My colleague Marty has previously talked about how budgets are moral documents, and we make decisions based on what we think the moral rightness, the moral correctness should be. And we've mostly done it about what interests want in terms of funding the police or other areas without necessarily thinking about what's the greatest need. And that's what I'd want to do, using a racial equity lens for any decisions we make, be it housing policy or education or transportation, to be able to try and meet the need for affordable housing in communities that most need it, as opposed to simply the communities that are least able to defend against it.
Thank you. Ms. Lynch.
Hi,
A
Sean.
pressing issue that has come up very often over the course of the last year, of course, as we talked about, is housing. When asked in a recent interview with the Dan Owls Liberal Democratic Club, if you oppose the removal of the nearly 300 homeless individuals from the Lucerne Hotel due to pressure from some local residents, you responded by saying that yes, you oppose the removal and you believe that, quote, we shouldn't be warehousing homeless individuals into shelters and hotels. We should focus on finding them permanent housing. New York City spent $1.8 billion in 2018 on its operating its shelter system. In the next 10 years, the city will allocate another $650 million in capital funding allocated to upgrade and expand the system. Even with this massive amount of spending, the shelter system only helps between 60 to 80,000 people. You continue to say that in 2015, there were enough vacant buildings and lots to house almost 200,000 people, which is more than enough to house every homeless person in New York City. My question to you is, what is stopping us from housing everybody in these vacant buildings and lots, and how do we go about changing that?
Well, thank you, Sean, for that question. We clearly have not used our funds efficiently. The city of New York, and as someone that worked in the mayor's office, I'm very aware of how we use our funds and where we need to redirect some of our funding. I will say a couple of things. I think as a city council member, I would look at the mayor's housing plan and see where we can be more efficient and have those who are living on the street, who are homeless, who are not necessarily living on the street, but living at a friend's house and surfing from sofa to sofa. How can we effectively get some of those folks into permanent housing? I don't think that the city of New York effectively uses all of its resources and outreach to folks who are in need in need of permanent housing. So that's one. Second, I think we need to be creative and look at the commercial spaces that are currently unoccupied, and how do we maximize unused spaces throughout the city. And then finally, I think we need to look at those that are currently in supportive housing and those that are ready to transition to permanent housing. And so, listen, Sean, I worked in an administration where we did things very well, and then other things we clearly needed to improve upon. And I'm the first to admit that our homeless plan and our housing plan did not work. While I disagree with, some of the mayor and the administration's choices, I think we're at a pivotal point in our city to change the trajectory for a number of folks, and I'd love to be a part of that.
Thank you. Ms. Melendez, in April last year, the Huffington Post reported that a rent strike you were a part of will continue until Cuomo cancels rent across the state for 4 months, or for however long the pandemic lasts, freezes rent prices, and houses the 92,000 homeless people across the state, from whom stay-at-home orders are cruel and meaningless. Now, we see that this problem has persisted, and this may persist for a number of years. My question for you is, what can you do as a city council member to address these issues?
I think, as part of the Housing Justice for All coalition, what we have asked for is the taxing of wealth, taxing of income, taxing of corporations. These are the things that, there's enough money to cover. There was a period of time when the wealthy was taxed at a much higher rate than they are right now. And they didn't blink, and they did just fine. They didn't die. So I think that we need to move back towards increasing the taxes on the people that and the corporations that are able to pay should pay their fair share. They're not paying, they're utilizing the resources in the city, right? Police, water, garbage removal, all of the resources, right? But they're not putting back into to, back, they're not giving back. So when you make a withdrawal from the bank and you don't make any deposits, right, you go bankrupt. And that's what they've done. They've sucked the city dry.
Thank you. Mr. Ortega. One of your common phrases is low income should not be synonymous with low quality, meaning that those with low income should not have to live in squalor. We have suffered from decades of federal disinvestment of NYCHA, which has led to hundreds of thousands of New York City residents living in appalling conditions. Specifically speaking, what policies must be enacted to ensure low income is no longer synonymous with low quality?
So policy response to that is priority within the city council, and don't fool yourself thinking that one council member by themselves can change and pass policy throughout the council body. You have to, and I've learned this from my union brethren and sister and non-gender conforming, that you have to build power through coalition to advance interests. So I would answer that question by saying, first, a couple of things. One, you would have to, yes, you're going to have to rely on the federal government to give money to the state, and then on the state level, you're going to have to rely on taxing the rich and passing marijuana to bring in more monies into the district, and then having a city council member that's going to stay vigilant on how that money is brought down to NYCHA along with the body, because you don't control, one council member doesn't control the faucet of monies that come in. It's done through the budget process as a whole. But something that you can advocate for, and I don't know if I've heard the other council members candidates talk about this, is changing home rule for New York City. And if you change home rule, you can then take control of how you tax for New York City and use those monies for projects like NYCHA. It's not that, and let me know time check, how much I have?
1:45 seconds.
Okay, I can slow this down. And it's not that I'm saying you live in squalor. It's that I'm saying is traditionally in this district that West Harlem Dems represents, the resources have not been given. And as a result of that, you have not had the same resources as, let's say, 78th Street, 82nd Street, 89th Street. And when you starve a district of those resources, the unintended consequences, well, not even unintended, the consequences that occur are lack of affordable housing. I think my colleague, and I'm learning to use mixed Cummings, with cleanups. These are infrastructural needs that the city is supposed to provide. So what I want to do, 1 minute, and by the grace of God, I get into city council, or one of my colleagues gets into city council, is a total overhaul of infrastructure for the city, so that you can almost where you refund social services to the communities that need it the most. And if you walk out of this Zoom session and you walk out into the street, you will see literally the floors littered with wrappers and so forth, with gum wrappers and garbage and whatnot. And that's what we have to focus. So if I'm lucky enough, I definitely want to chair the Government Operations Committee so that we can change how infrastructure would work in the city moving forward.
Thank you. Turning now to our second topic, education, starting again with Mix Cummings. Education equity is not listed as something you support on your website, but I would safely assume that you do. Education equity provides that each school and each student has the resources they need in order to provide for quality education. Currently, the mayor has controls over the schools. What are your thoughts on mayoral control? And if you do not support it, what would you propose as an alternative?
Well, I certainly support equitable funding for our schools. Right now, our school system is not provided the resources it needs. We need to integrate our schools. We need to make sure that every student, no matter what zip code they're born into, is provided with an equal education. We have a ventilation system in our school that was unhealthy before COVID, and now we're seeing school windows have to be open in 30-degree weather. So we need a Green New Deal that's not just for our city, but we need a Green New Deal specific to NYCHA and a Green New Deal specific to our public schools to ensure we're getting proper resources and environmental needs in the schools. We need mental health care providers in our schools. We need social workers in our schools. And I think the city council and the community should have more of a say on who is appointed to positions of leadership within our school system and district. Because right now, our schools aren't providing services to our most marginalized and vulnerable communities. So equitability means, like Dan mentioned earlier, budgets are moral documents. And when we're overfunding something, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but when we're overfunding something like the police, which is 10, 11% of our city budget, that's a disservice to our teachers, to our students, and to our parents. And part of our recovery process from COVID is we're going to be in this for a while, right? So we need to not only make our in-person school learning more equitable, but we need to make our at-home learning more equitable, because there's something like over 75,000, 76,000, 77,000, I think is the number of students who don't have working tablets or access to at-home learning. So we need universal broadband. We need to make sure that we're checking in and making sure parents have the resource. A lot of parents are working 2, 3, 4 jobs. They don't have childcare. And so we have like a huge percentage of kids who have dropped off, and we don't know what's happening with them because of at-home learning. So we need to invest not only in school, but our at-home learning to make sure kids are provided the resources they need. Right now, our school system is a huge part of long-term systemic racism. And we have to address that and readjust it and make sure we're providing equitability. And that's why I think with the mayor control, we need to have more community and council control.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen, picking right up with equity in education, you said it's paramount to the future of our city and improving income inequality, higher education levels, and local economic success. In what ways are there inequity in our education, and what specifically needs to be done to achieve equity?
Are you talking about across the board early education and higher ed, or is it a continuation of elementary education before, or up to me?
All education. You can address that however you would like.
Sure. So, I mean, I think with regards to early education, K through 12, we absolutely need to get the $4 billion that's owed to the city as part of the Campaign for Fiscal Equity's Alliance for Quality Education lawsuit. I mean, full stop. We're trying to allocate resources that we don't have, in part because they've been held hostage by a recalcitrant governor and a state legislature that only now has a majority to override a veto, and hopefully that will lead to positive resolution. That's first. That's where some of that money will come from. I also want to acknowledge what Marty said in terms of folks who are dropped off because they don't have access to broadband and they don't have access to online education. When all of us take office, whenever one of us takes office at the end of this year, early next year, I hope that kids are back in school. Please, dear God, I have an 8-year-old, and I really hope he's in school. But I don't want us to forget, right? Like, I don't want us to then say, like, oh, it's resolved, we don't have to worry about it anymore. We need to look at broadband like it's a utility. We need to look at investing. We'd never have an apartment legally without water and heat. We'd be outraged if someone didn't have running water in their apartment. We need to actually look at internet access as a utility in the exact same way. Everybody needs to have it, and we need to find a way to get it to people who can't afford it, because it's critical for having connections into our society and for education as well. I want to look at what we've done in District 3 in Manhattan in middle schools, and what they've done in Brooklyn and District 15 in middle schools towards integrating students in those districts. They've been able to change some of the demographics for students in those districts and make them more diverse and more equitable across the whole district, as opposed to what you have in some districts where there's a wealthy, whiter part and a poor people of color, and that those school districts are unfortunately corresponding. The wealthier, whiter part tends to be outperforming, and the poorer part, which tends to be disproportionately people of color, underperforms. Let's try and that's about resources, and it's about geography. If we can move students around, that's part of it. It's not going to solve poverty, let me be clear, but it's a beginning to be able to move students into different school systems where there isn't one school that sort of sucks up, or a few schools that sucks up all of the resources, and the others are left without what they need to be able to provide a quality education for the children there. I've been involved with as both a public school graduate and a public school parent, and I've seen right now up front what the differences that we need to make. And it's clear to me that we are shortchanging ourselves if we don't provide a decent education for all of the kids that we have in elementary. And 1 second about higher ed, absolutely we have to be funding CUNY. The CUNY, 90% of CUNY graduates are here in this city, and we're educating our workforce. CUNY should be free. I know we're not going to be able to do it on the first day that I take office or one of my colleagues do, but absolutely we have to move towards that, because it's clear that what we're doing is we're not investing in our workforce, and we have to do that. Am I out of time, or have a moment more? I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Lynch, some of your top priorities as it pertains to education includes combating student hunger and homelessness, ending the school to prison pipeline, and desegregating our public school systems. Very simply, how do we desegregate our schools? How do we end student hunger and end the school to prison pipeline?
Oh, who thought of that? Smart woman. So how do we end desegregation? I always go back to simple terms: access, right? Resources, opportunity. Um, Listen, I hear all of my smart colleagues on this call talking about what we need to do, what we need to do. I am from the School of Bill Lynch, where I think we need to start by building coalitions and finding out exactly what parents and teachers actually want. And throughout my tenure in City Hall and outside of City Hall, I've spoken to a number of advocates, parents, teachers, and students that feel that resources need to be migrated into the school system and not necessarily integration, right? Because sometimes schools and students are comfortable where they're at, particularly if they have the resources that they need. And so as city council member, it would be my top priority to ensure that the resources, whether it's funding, right, addressing the digital divide, not only in schools, but within the home, are seriously my top priority. In addition to that, I think we need to look outside of just the curriculum. I think we need to address holistically, what does the community need in terms of desegregation? And I propose that we provide health services throughout the district and citywide. That includes social workers, medical, as well as dietary needs. I know that I have 1 minute, so let me move to the next question that you had, Sean. What was the other question?
How do we end the school to prison pipeline?
How do we end the school to prison pipeline? First thing I would propose is that we remove the public safety guards that are currently within the school system. There is a clear feeling within each school when you have a public safety officer that there is a mental restraint when it comes to education and the freedom to really learn on a day-to-day basis. So we need to remove that enforcement that is currently within the school system. Secondly, I think students clearly need to see students that look like them, right? How do we encourage more teachers of color to participate and be within these schools and within communities of color? And then finally, I would say we need to provide additional resources, not just to the students, but to the family and the teacher. One of the things that I propose is that, particularly in West Harlem and Upper West Side and in Washington Heights, is really balancing the parent-teacher association. I know the Upper West Side has a very strong parent-teacher association. I propose that we create a fund specifically for the entire district so that resources are evenly distributed across.
Thank you. Ms. Melendez, we know that a lot of parents rely on schools as a form of childcare. New York City is facing or currently in the midst of a childcare crisis. COVID-19 has demonstrated that the patchwork of childcare providers and after-school programs is simply not enough to support New York City's working families. How would you propose, or what would you propose to strengthen and fund childcare for working families across New York?
Well, right now, childcare centers are closed, aren't they? But when they do reopen, again, the taxing of the rich will provide more than enough funding for social services and childcare services across the board. The state still owes, I understand the state still owes city public schools a lot of money. Maybe we can get some of that money to offset the cost. Childcare mostly affects women and women of color. And they, you know, we need to think about women's work as valuable and expand the services that are available to help, especially single parents, to stay in the workforce, to be able to work, to be able to go back to school. Those are things that, you know, that exemplify the gender inequality that we have in this society, right? We don't fund those things, but, you know, we fund other things that are frivolous. I would, the money has to come from taxation of the rich. It has to come from that. We've been waiting for the federal government to give us the money. They're not going to give it. You know, maybe now with Biden, but I'm not holding my breath, right? And even if Biden gives us the money, it would be, you know, for COVID relief and other things that are related to the economic, recovery from COVID. But this is something that, you know, I've thought about. I've spoken to women, especially women that have autistic children. It's really difficult for them to get childcare. And so, you know, I think we need to think about all of the spectrum of children that need, and the parents that have the need for childcare, and not skimp on that, because women are over half the population, really.
Thank you. Mr. Ortega, your website discusses your plan to make CUNY tuition free for New York City residents, more funding for CUNY, and other measures for CUNY students. There was a lot of talk and a lot of mention about CUNY, yet students in our community, starting with early education and moving on up, do not have access to internet, do not have laptops. Basically, they are on the other side of the technology divide. What is your policy proposal to achieve education equity?
To achieve education equity, you need the Green New Deal version of infrastructure. And though costly, worthwhile for the city now in a pandemic, and now with new 35 incoming council members and a new mayor, and in that honeymoon stage, you have to rebuild the infrastructure of the city by the city paying for the infrastructure to pave the way for universal broadband. And then you can bring in the Verizons or the Time Warner cables or the God knows how many different service providers to come in and service those residents. But the city has control of the infrastructure and then could cap the prices if a company were to get too cute with that. So that is a lofty goal, but it's the right goal. And you asked a question before, I think to Lena or to someone, you know, if you were to make a decision that was, I think it was, regarding the hotels, you know, where a portion of the community was against the hotels, but the right decision was you can't kick these folk out. They need permanent housing. Sometimes you have to make a decision. While unpopular, it is the right decision. And that's the council member that you'll get with me, that you have to make the right decision. Damn the political consequences. I'm okay with being a one-term council member, but I feel damn good and sleep at night in West Harlem that if I make the right decision for the whole of the district, and our whole of the district is really reflective of the whole of the city, that, yes, let's move forward with infrastructure for true broadband. I yield my time.
Thank you. Turning now to our third topic, criminal justice and police. Ms. Cummings, regarding the police, our community has seen a recent spike in violent crimes, and last summer saw many New Yorkers call for a defund of the police. We also saw many clashes between the police and protesters. Currently on your website, it says that we must demand accountability from the NYPD and law enforcement institutions. People have been demanding police accountability for decades. How do you actually plan to achieve this goal?
Sean, that's such a good question. And thank you. You know, our police system, like I said earlier, accounts for 10 or 11% of our city's budget. And when you have police who in the last fiscal year, it was $650 million spent in overtime. We, the taxpayer, are paying for their settlements. That should come out of their pensions. And the CCRB right now will make a recommendation, and the commissioner, Shea, who I think should resign like yesterday, can just kind of wave off the CCRB's ruling. So the CCRB's decisions, I think, should be binding, and we need to have a hiring freeze because right now we have like twice the amount of cops per resident as other cities of our caliber. So we need to have a hiring freeze. We need to have accountability and transparency in if the mayor is not going to get control of the police, then we as a council have to put through a budget that's reflective of the needs of the community. So yeah, I'm a big believer, and we have to defund the police. And then in saying that, we have to reinvest in the communities that are most impacted by police violence and police brutality. We need to put resources into, not every 911 call needs to be a cop. We need to have resources allocated to mental health professionals, homeless professionals who know how to help people experiencing homelessness, social workers, addiction specialists. I always talk about, I'm a recovering drug addict. I'm grateful that I have almost 10 years sober, but we need people who are able to address these needs, these social services. And I understand there are violent crimes that need to be addressed. I know Corey's on the street a lot dealing with shootings that happen on the street. I talk to local businesses about stuff that's happening. So we need to have better relationships with our local precincts to address those violent crimes, but while doing so, in defunding, allocating resources where we can have policing be community policing, making sure that we're providing these vital social services. Our police, I believe our mayor and commissioner have lost control of the over-militarized NYPD, and we need to have hiring practices that are reflective of the communities, not guys coming in from New Jersey or Long Island who don't know the needs of the city. So yeah, I would have voted very differently on the last budget because I don't think it was equitable or reflective of the needs. That $600 million in overtime could go to education, could go to NYCHA, could go to our parks and recreation. In our district, there are no city-funded composting sites above 107th Street. That's insane to me. We can fund equitability and resources to our communities. Corey talked about the garbage on the street. Why did we cut sanitation by millions of dollars during a pandemic when people are outside more? So yeah, there's a lot of reasons we need defunding of the police and a lot of reasons we need to hold them accountable. That's a very long answer to try to cover a lot of ground there. But this is something that I'm very passionate about is getting equitability in our policing. So thanks for the question. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Turning now to Mr. Cohen. Justice looks different when you're poor and Black. Most of those swept up in the system are just that, poor and Black. Your stance on criminal justice says that while most of the criminal justice laws are governed by state, we can all be advocates for the changes we need. What changes can our city council members, not our state legislators, do to make the system more fair?
So Marty touched on some of that in terms of what we can do with regards to the police. I would favor having the Inspector General being an independent agency. I'd have the council to have oversight over, advise and consent over the police commissioner, and I'd also make sure that the Civilian Complaint Review Board was the last stop for police misconduct, as opposed to going to the police commissioner and allowing them to override when a police officer misbehaves or violates the law or kills an innocent person. But there's more to it than that. We also should be, and I think all my colleagues feel strongly in the same way about closing Rikers. I don't favor that we should be building new prisons, because I don't think we need them. I think we have enough jail capacity already in the boroughs, and also the advantage of having people be closer to home if they are in jails awaiting trial, or ideally with alternatives to incarceration, so that they are with their families and don't have to miss work and don't have to miss school, and can be close to families of support. Those are some things that I would do, but it's more than, racial justice is more than just criminal justice. That's start of it, and that's part of it, but that's not all of it. We're talking about looking at things in housing and education and transportation, and how we look at the decisions that we make to try to change the decisions that we make so that they impact the people who are most impacted. Poor Black and brown people are on the receiving end of not just police brutality, but inefficient and unequal housing decisions. There's not enough transportation networks in communities that desperately need it. There's not enough education funding, as we talked about before, in communities that require it. And this district, but the city at large, you can map over fairly clearly where the resources go in the communities that are most able to advocate for it. And those, unfortunately, tend to be predominantly white and wealthy, and the communities that can't. I've worked in this community my entire life, and if I have the good fortune to serve as its council member, I will advocate for resources across the district, but not equally, because there's some parts of the district they're doing okay, and there are other parts of the district, particularly in West Harlem and north of here, that are going to need more resources to be able to catch up for what we've been historically disinvesting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Ms. Lynch,
I'm ready for you, Sean.
you've come out in favor of reducing the NYPD's budget. You also
Yes.
said that while complete elimination is ideal, we should focus on reducing the NYPD's bloated $6 billion budget. You also said that you support calls to reduce the budget by $1.1 billion and shift responsibilities away from the NYPD in order to revert funds to social programs and restorative justice alternatives for the criminal justice system. A couple questions to you. One, hypothetically speaking, if we were to eliminate the NYPD budget, what would be the consequences of such action? And two, is cutting the budget and diverting funds to other programs and alternatives the answer to making the NYPD an entity we can trust?
Yes and no, Sean. Listen, we have, as someone that has lived in this community, and when I said at the beginning of this call that I'm, coming back home, I've always been someone in government that would say to myself, you are always coming back home, right? And so the decisions that I make as someone that lives in West Harlem and is very familiar with Black and brown communities and the plight that we experience with NYPD, I realized that there is a deeper trust issue that goes far beyond the de Blasio administration or the Bloomberg administration or the Giuliani administration. And that's clearly something that we need to address from 1,000 feet in the air and even on the local level, right? And so while I worked in the de Blasio administration, I also convened community stakeholders to figure out how to really address the trust issues on the ground. And so what we did was work with local precincts across both the 7th and the 9th districts and community leaders to address those trust issues. And as someone that worked in City Hall, I redirected funds from out of NYPD into actual social services and local community groups like Sister Aisha, as well as some local community groups up here in District 7, like the Shabazz Center. I think as someone that lives in this community and is from this community, we have to develop a very hyper local plan with community leaders to address the trust issues that have clearly been around for centuries. far beyond the de Blasio administration. Defunding the police. While I believe that is, I have 1 minute. I believe that defunding the police is a very it's a campaign that I believe in, but we have to operate in a very realistic way, right? And part of that is police reform. What does actual police reform look like? And as city council member, police reform for me is not just developing a campaign, but also actually redirecting and reinvesting back into our communities. It's about reallocation and not defund, right? And so as someone that has been on the front line, we need to, again, look at this holistically. How do we reinvest in our communities so that people have not just a living wage, but are able to save? How do we really reinvest into community-based CBOs, not for 1 year, but for multiple years, so that we can address the ills within our community, right? And so it's really examining the budget and where we can pinpoint gaps and how do we fill in those gaps. I've taken up a lot of time. I can keep talking about this, Sean. I will probably call you later and we can continue talking about this. But listen, I'm very passionate. I'm very passionate about this topic. I'm a firm believer in police reform. I support the movement of defund the police, but I think we need to zero in and discuss on a very local level, what does police reform look like? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Melendez, I had a really
Lena.
I had a really difficult time trying to find information regarding any of your policy proposals as it relates to policing and criminal justice. Right now, the city is seeing a spike in violent crimes. As I mentioned to earlier, the police and protesters are clashing. People have talked about police reform. What will you do as council member to reform the police and restore trust and help reduce the violence?
Well, I will let you know how I feel about the police. I think that before we even allow cadets to go into training school, that they should be fully vetted. We need to know what they've been chatting about in their social media. If they have extremist, white supremacist views or any other extremist views that we may not want them to be put on the street with a badge and a gun and so much power. We need to perhaps get more police from to be more representative of the communities that they're serving. You got police coming in from Staten Island and Long Island and other places that, where these new cadets have not had to sit next to, they lived in segregated areas. They haven't had to sit next to a Black or brown student or shared a meal in their home or, gotten to know the culture of different cultures. And then they come into our cities to police our neighborhoods and with a gun and a badge, and they're scared to death. And so, you see these cases where cops are literally shaking with a gun in their hand, right? Because all they see on the media is that Black and brown folks are violent criminals, right? Our previous president calling Mexicans rapists and animals, and right? So I think that we need better representation for different communities. And I think, I don't know when the whole thing started about where police should not live within the area where they work. I I don't know what the thinking was on that, but maybe they should. I think that, you know, yes, I'm for the reduction of the NYPD budget. You know, they shouldn't have homeless outreach, mobile crisis, and, you know, detail, right? They shouldn't be called for every last thing. We need also youth programs like mentoring. We need job training. We need things that we know reduce crime. We need to fund those things, right? We know this. There are studies upon studies that have told us that that's how you do it. And so, you know, when the first thing that gets cut are in the budgets are those programs, right? We know where the priorities lie. So, you know, I've lost track of the question. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. That's quite all right, Ms. Melendez. We're going to turn down to Mr. Ortega. Mr. Ortega, you have a strong criminal justice platform. However, you did not discuss police accountability. You discussed empowering the CCRB. But the CCRB, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, is only as good as the evidence they get, which is usually provided to them by the very entity they are trying to hold accountable. If a person's claim goes unsubstantiated, it is because no witness has come forward, which happens very often. So my thing is this: if the CCRB is still relying on the police to provide them with the evidence against the police, and witnesses are afraid to come forward for fear of retribution, how do we go about holding the police accountable and restoring the trust between our community and the police?
So remember when I was talking about infrastructure reform? I would put this under that. I would say that, and I believe I've been paying close attention to the other candidates and respect you all, but I haven't heard this yet. To truly reform how the police carries on, you need charter reform. Because if you look at the charter now, it says, you know, police should take care of property, deal with vacancies, and also the police department has the disciplinary authority. I say we change the charter, and that will truly change the job description and duties of the police, which would mean remove that aspect of the NYPD providing the information and give it either directly to the CCRB, or in cases like police, you know, policing themselves, give it to the New York State Attorney General to make the request for the information. It's not so much a request, it's more like a lawful order. But if that doesn't pass in time, straight to subpoena. The best laws are useless if enforcement is not there, if it does not exist. And in this case, we can't take a chance of having a mayor. We know we're gonna have a new mayor, we're gonna have a honeymoon stage in the first year. But if something happens and the mayor changes course, the course of the NYPD changes along with it. So you need long-lasting change and reform, and you can only do that through the charter.
Thank you. Now we're going to turn to our final topic for today. We're going to go with the economy. Mix Cummings, your small business platform consists of protecting local businesses over chain franchises. Straightforward, how do we accomplish this?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, small businesses, our local businesses, I'm a big believer, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree. Our locally owned businesses are the bedrock, the backbone of our communities, you know. And I love District 7 because we're one of the last places in Manhattan that really is reliant on our small businesses. And these are places that have been, as we've seen over the last several years with rising rents, more vacancies. So we need to have a commercial rent stabilization to ensure our businesses are able to afford to be there. Listen, nothing against Applebee's. I love an appetizer sampler platter, but I would rather go to a local restaurant than a big chain. I'd rather go to the hardware store down the street than order something online. Because it's about connection and community. So commercial rent stabilization, and Lena's talked about this a lot, but we need to use our relationships in Albany to advocate for, in this time with the pandemic, rent cancellation, mortgage cancellation, and true small business relief. And the city is able, I think Biden just put this through the other day, the city is able to provide relief as well, and FEMA will reimburse. So there's no excuse to not be supporting our local businesses right now. We need to advocate our counterparts in Albany to put a tax on the wealthiest among us. There's no reason you should have someone like Jeff Bezos, who's like quadrupling his wealth every like second, it seems, while small businesses are shuttering. So we need to put through relief packages in the city, state, and federal level. And we talk a lot about coalition building, but there's only so much city council can do, right? So we need to have relationships with our state and federal government so we can really get the support these businesses need. Like I mentioned in my opening remarks, because of my career, I've worked in a lot of these establishments. 1 minute, thanks. There's 3 bars that I've worked at that have been open for over like 20 years. They've all closed their doors permanently because of the pandemic. They're not coming back. You know, I have a friend of mine who owns a restaurant a block from my house. She can't afford to pay her staff. So she's the cook, the waiter, the bus person, the person who sets up the heaters outside. You know, like we should have, we do have the resources to help our small businesses. It's about enacting, like we talk about on this conversation a lot, a budget that's going to help that, a council that's going to stand up and really provide the services and listen to organizations like the Hospitality Alliance and hear the needs of our local businesses and bring those voices to the table. Don't just tweet about it, but bring restaurant owners to the table, bring shop owners to the table and hear, what do you need? What do you need so we can address it? And I'm anxious for this recovery plan because I'm worried that a lot of businesses aren't going to survive. But part of the recovery process needs to be stimulating the economy by like we talked about earlier, the rent and mortgage cancellation, small business relief, having the city put funds in and get the federal government to repay through FEMA because this is a crisis. And making sure that when we reopen, we're prioritizing a bunch of different industries. You know, like our take theater, for example. Theaters closed. That impacts the hotel industry, the taxi driver industry, restaurants. So we need to be stimulating this. So I'm trying to fit it all in the time. But thank you. These time constraints on these screeners.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen, you come out and acknowledge what everybody seems to know, that there are disparities in income, education, and employment status, which has led many Black and Brown residents to holding jobs that are most at risk during this pandemic. Can you clearly state how your plan for how you will move our people towards parity in income and education, and how you will protect those most at risk?
So one group that's the most at risk is the gig workers who are not permanent employees and have no sick leave. And as a council member, that's one of the things we can do is ensure that if folks get ill, be it from COVID right now or in the future, that they have the ability to leave without getting fired. So that's one of the things that I would support towards equity. But more broadly, I think what we're talking about is the issue of unequal income outcomes in this district also tie very, very tightly to healthcare. If you look across this district, the Community Board 9 was last of all of the Manhattan Community Board districts in health outcomes in 2019. And it was almost second to last of all of the community boards in the entire city, in part because of lack of access to healthcare. And part of that is connected to more medical clinics and more healthcare, public health clinics in this district that would provide, among other things, it would provide a public vaccination site, which we don't have. And it would be a way towards providing some additional health equity, because that is the foundation. If people have health equity, they begin to be able to build other things on top of it. If people are worried about medical care, that is going to undermine everything else in their lives. The other things that we can be doing, as I've talked about, is more affordable housing to create housing stability in this district. And that's why I've called for 1,000 new units of permanently affordable housing, which will create about housing for some 3,000 people in the district. And even if the lawsuit that fails in terms of not allowing half the units to stay in the district, that would be 1,500 people in the district who would have affordable housing if we're able to maximize those sites, which are either owned by or controlled by the city. Those are a couple of things that I would do. I'd also, I think something that maybe Stacy made reference to about trying to provide equity for schools in this district. There are some PTAs that right now raise raise $1 million. 1 minute, I see it. Thank you, Sean. And trying to provide some way where those PTAs can contribute towards a fund that would be supplemented by the city to give PTAs some access to capital. I went to the Margaret Douglas School. Their PTA raised $5,000 a year, and they were excited. That was like a record for them. That's a rounding error for some PTAs in the southern part of the district, and it's absurd that there's that gigantic disparity. And it makes a difference in terms of what sort of additional supplies and services you can provide for the students in those districts. There's other things that we've talked about. I think Lena was asked about childcare, and we need to have universal childcare because people can't go to work if they're worried about their kid being safe at night or after school. And we need to have after school programs as well. All these things are going to cost money. All of these things are going to take resources. And we've made decisions not to fund them. We've made decisions, we've empowered a governor who's essentially a Republican to prevent people from getting the resources that they need. And it's about time that we stay and take some of that back. I can see now with a veto-proof legislature that we can put real pressure on our legislators and say it's time for us to get the resources for the communities that need it and not just further one man's political ambition in the state. Those are some of the things I would do. I got a lot more too, but I think I'm out of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean.
Turning to Ms. Lynch, we're going to continue.
Sean, please call me Stacy. Please call me Stacy. My mom is Miss Lynch.
Understand, Stacy. We're going to keep on with that and kind of go back to the gig workers for a second. I tried to do my research on you last night, and I didn't find much in regards to any economic policy proposals.
Yes.
As I spoke to Dan just moments ago, there are tens of thousands of gig workers who are excluded from the city's paid sick day requirement and simply cannot afford to stay home if they feel ill. This pandemic is going to continue to be prolonged unless we are able to have people self-isolate and get the help they need. And otherwise, we won't be able to stimulate the economy. So as council member, what will you do to address the gig workers and help stimulate this economy back to where it needs to be?
Well, I mean, listen, I am a firm believer in investing in the in investing in the workforce. And some of that comes at a very high level on the federal level. With countries all over the globe are doing amazing things where they are providing more than living wage for folks to stay at home, pay their bills, and live a comfortable life, right? And not have to worry about if they can pay their rent or their light bill or anything else. Countries are doing this in the middle of a pandemic. I think the federal level has to be a little more creative in terms of economic development and economic investment to states and cities across the country, right? So that's one. Obviously, the state could do more. We need, I believe, investment from the state in a major way. And I understand the governor's concerns that if you give it to one city, you have to give it to all. But the reality is this city and this state is in a very dire economic situation, and the governor has to answer the call to really invest in the city in a major way and provide a loan to the city. I'm a firm believer in that. And then finally, on a very local level, I think we need to look at some of the big corporations that are our neighbors. They continue to drain from the city and not reinvest in the communities that invest in them. So there, I think, needs to be a stricter corporate social responsibility in each community. And I think corporations need to really start investing more and in a major way in the folks that live in these communities and the communities themselves.
Thank you.
Is that it, Sean? I can give you more.
I mean, you still have a minute left if you want to keep going.
Oh, I can keep going.
Yeah.
Your
I
time
will-
to us. We'll take it.
Listen, I'll keep going. I'm not keeping track of time. I'm just moving.
Oh,
I-
shout out
I
the
think-
website. Shout out the website.
So Corey, stop eating up my time now. So I think, also we need to invest in small businesses, right? Small businesses are the lifeline of the community, and they actually hire people who are gig workers. And so how we do that is, again, investment from the city. One of the things that I proposed to some of the electeds up here before I decided to jump into this race is that we create an Upper Manhattan fund, right? Just like the public advocate has a fund and the mayor has a fund, Upper Manhattan should have its own fund. And we ask all these big businesses that operate in our district to invest in this fund. And then we redirect those funds into small businesses and gig workers and restaurants in the community. So I think, overall, Sean, it really is a coalition about reinvestment in the community and its people. And then I have to say one more thing before I close. Dan, don't you take my idea about creating a fund for PTAs. If I see that on your list, we're gonna have a problem.
Tell you what, if I use it, I'll give you credit, okay? Like my colleague Stacey Lynch says, we should be doing, all right? All right.
Very good, very
Everybody
good.
cooperative. We're all working together now.
That is great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Turning to Ms. Melendez. Ms.
Lena,
Melendez.
please.
Lena, in March of 2020 on occupyradio.net, you said in an interview that the city is going to crash and burn. This was in response to what the effect of the pandemic will have on the city. We have seen the devastating impact of the pandemic right here in our own community. What policies do we need to enact to put our city back on the repair and achieve healthcare equity?
Healthcare equity?
Sorry, economy equity. Economic equity.
Economic equity. Okay. I'm a strong proponent for small businesses. I have plans, and I have been meeting with our small businesses in the area. I've organized and advocated for the SBJSA. Small businesses are really, they provide 50% of the jobs that we have. This is something that if we don't invest in, where are we gonna continue to pay people unemployment forever and ever? Amen. It's something's got to give. We have to protect the small businesses. Small businesses have been suffering even before the pandemic. To give you an idea, I spoke with one guy who had 5 businesses, and one of his businesses told him if he wanted to renew his lease, that he would have to pay him $1 million under the table to renew the lease. And then the landlord sold the building, and the new landlord put him out anyway. So now he was out of his business and he was out of $1 million. That should be made criminal. Right now, there's nothing on the books that says that it's unlawful. They have to increase federal funding to recover from the pandemic. It has to happen. Between 2017 and 2018, 1,000 businesses in New York City were shuttering every month. Places like, and I'm sure Marty can can appreciate places like the I'm blanking on the name. Cornelia Street Cafe closed. That had been going on that was an institution in New York. They had live plays going on, 700 live plays a month. There are places that are gone. Lennox Lounge is gone. That was an icon. Places more uptown, Margot, people are still crying about that. This is, New York is losing its culture. Why are people going to want to come to New York if they can't see the variety and the diversity? If it's being, it's killed off. It's going to look like anywhere Main Street, USA. Chase Bank, Citibank, Wendy's, McDonald's, Starbucks. No. We need to support our small businesses, and we also need to teach people to when they spend their dollar in Wendy's, they're putting that money goes into the CEO's pockets and into the higher ups in that organization. When you spend $1 in the local pharmacy, right? That circulates. The workers that work there live in the area. That circulates in the community. We need to teach people to vote with their dollar.
Thank you.
I'm out of time.
Yes.
All right.
That's all good.
Thank you
very much. Thank you. Mr. Ortega, turning to the last topic and the last question for today. A lot of the candidates here today have discussed getting big businesses to reinvest into our community. We've seen other entities such as Columbia University also creep into our district without reinvesting. How do we get these big time players to reinvest in our community so that our community can repair itself from the devastating impact of COVID?
I'm sorry, I had noise in the background. When you said these, but you referenced Columbia, but are you asking in this specific example how entities like Columbia can reinvest, or in general?
In general, but we can use Columbia as an example as well. How do we get these big entities such as Columbia, or as referenced earlier, Wendy's or Starbucks, or any of these other big corporations to reinvest in our community?
So one thing that I haven't heard from the other candidates is establishing a bid in our district. Their bids further up in Washington Heights, but having a bid would be one way, and doing it through the city council and making sure there are actual strings attached to these big box stores, similar to Stacey Lynch's fund, but tying it to a business improvement district. So then you can, and call it what you want, a tax, an investment tax from these big entities. I would also say that you need to have a city council member. Now, this is something that you can say locally, as non-gender conforming person, that one council member can do is make sure and stay on top that if an entity like Columbia University were to, as before, use eminent domain, or were to use it again, to make sure there's a solid ironclad community benefits agreement, not only that looks good on paper, but is an enforced agreement that if said entity does not keep up their bargain, they can be taken to court. How much time do I have?
1:56.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to one of the questions that was asked of Marty Allen Cummings with regards to small businesses and the Small Business Job Survival Act. And this will go for everyone here. I'm sure we're all going to sign on to that bill as incoming council members. But I'm going to go a step further and say, for those that have experience in government here, not just working with government, but representing the city and the district as government staffers, employees like Stacey and myself, it has to be a bit more than just signing your name, because we've seen iterations of this this legislation, this intro with Robert Jackson, and it was shot down like the what's that game on Nintendo? The duck and the little gun pack. It was shot down hard by the lobbying industry. So I would tell my council candidates that we have to do more than just put our names. We have to almost act like a union and build power through coalition to advance our interests. And that means that you better have 26 council members standing behind you, ready to vote for this, when the Speaker of the Council is looking you dead in the face and telling you, no, I'm not going to support this. Then you could show me how much chutzpah you have to push legislation. Because just signing your name on a piece of legislation, I could have a staffer do that. But pushing legislation in the face of true opposition, that's how you work for your district. And that's how you get it done. And I hope that any one of my colleagues can do the same in that position if they get there. But if I get there first, I'll let you know how it goes.
Thank
Just
you.
before you snap your fingers, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. I see you hating, Stacey. I see you hating. You know why I snap? Because it is recorded.
No, it's all love. It's all love.
God bless you, sister.
And that completes our forum for today. We're now going to turn to closings, and we'll start in the same order in which we began today's forum with. So, Mix Cummings, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much to all of you at West Harlem Dems. I have to say, this is a fun race to be in. It's always enjoyable being with my colleagues, because I think at the root of it, each of us is here to be of service to the people from 96 to 165th. And I'm committed to, no matter the outcome of this election, I'm committed to working with whoever the council member is, and all of us together working, because we want to help our community. And I'm excited for that. I'm excited to fight for housing justice for all, for a Green New Deal for the city, NYCHA, and our public schools, fighting for equitability in our schools and our small businesses and our laborers, like the folks who were just at Hunts Point demanding just $1 more, you know? And like Corey just mentioned, like standing up against billion-dollar entities like Columbia University that creep into the district, displacing people who have been here for generations, primarily our Black and brown communities, and displacing small businesses that are already struggling, and entities like Columbia University that aren't hiring union carpenters or just putting people's lives at risk. So I'm excited to fight for these issues, for transportation equitability and disability rights and sanitation, so we can have things like city-funded composting above 107th Street. You know, I'm excited to fight to hear what's happening in your building, what's happening on your street. Do you need Department of Transportation to put through speed bumps? Let's get them out there and do this. I'm excited to fight for equitable zoning and to restructure ULURP to be something that actually works for the community and doesn't work against the community. We need community voices at the table. And I'm excited to be somebody who is about team building and coalition building and working together with, you know, like Corey said, it's not just us in council. There's 50 other council members we have to work with to get things done in this city. And I'm excited to do this. I'm excited. And it's just, we have a chance to reshape our city government. We always say, I want to change the government. Almost every seat is term limited on June 22nd at the primary. We can change the government in this city to be one that represents the needs and the interests of the people who have been left behind by a city that prioritizes rich people who sit in their penthouses that they come to 1 month out of the year. We need to fight for everyday people who are struggling, who need support, who need voices that are going to show up and listen to them and say, okay, I got you, let's go. I believe I am that voice. And I'm excited to do this work with you. And if it's not me, I'm excited to do with whoever in this space is that person. We're a team, no matter what. We're a team for the 140,000 people of District 7 because they're being left behind in this borough. And we have to stand up and do something and fight for them so their voices are heard, no matter what their immigration status is. Their voice must be heard in City Council. So thank you. Stay safe. And yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen.
I want to compliment Marty because he has been instrumental in trying to create a sense of community amongst all of the council districts. Not that the others on this panel and others who aren't here today haven't done the same, but Marty really has emphasized that, and it has created the nicest political campaign I have ever been in. I mean, it is really marvelous. There's really a sense of I would say friendly competition, but it isn't as hostile and mean-spirited as I've seen in other campaigns before. And I think if that's the only thing that ranked choice voting does, that is a positive step forward. We've talked about housing and education and criminal justice and the economy today. There's other issues that I wanted to touch on as well: transportation and climate change, and parks and historic preservation, things that matter to me and I'm sure matter to many of you as well. With transportation, I've been talking about creating 125th Street and 12th Avenue Amtrak stop, which would accelerate people getting from Midtown, from the 125th Street to Midtown in 8 minutes, or further uptown into jobs in north of us. That opportunity is relatively easy to obtain. It would be sort of the equivalent of 125th Street and Park Avenue. On the east side, it would be the same thing on the west side. Let me be clear, that's not an original idea. I'm just amplifying it, but it's something I care strongly about. I think we should be spending a little less money on ferries, which are expensive and subsidized at a fortune per ride, and spend more on the people who take the subway and buses. And speaking of buses, they're the only fully ADA compliant component of our transportation system. And I want to make sure that we're investing more in them and creating more bus routes, not cutting back on them. And we talked a little bit about climate change, and the Green New Deal has come up a bunch of times. I just wanted to expand on that for a minute more, which is that we have an opportunity with the Green New Deal to create real jobs, to put solar panels on the roof, even gardens, because who doesn't love cherry tomatoes? And the idea of being able to harness the energy for our energy needs, but as well as super insulating the buildings that we have so that they are more efficient, moving away from fossil fuels towards electrification of our buses, and moving away from fossil fuels entirely, getting us out of using gas to heat our homes and to cook our food, and instead move towards electricity. And also to stop investing in fossil fuel infrastructure throughout this city. We currently invest in oil refineries and gas refineries throughout the city to be able to supply the city's gas needs. We should be moving away from those fuels as well to reduce the risk of more climate change in the city. I've also called for a climate change policy that is reflective of what the city needs as opposed to just a portion of it. There's been discussion about trying to protect Lower Manhattan, like that's the only piece that matters, when really what we need to talk about is protecting all of the waterfront, all of the city's access to water, which we're gratefully in abundance, but it also means we have a great deal of exposure too. There's been discussions about aquaculture, which would provide large marshlands in front of the water, which would soak up any possible storm surges, as opposed to building a $1 trillion, really that's what it is, $1 trillion bridge underneath of Arizona Narrows, which we really just cannot afford and may not even be effective. I want to also talk about park equity. We have so much attention is paid attention to some of the bigger parks in the city, Central and Riverside Park, which are beautiful parks, don't get me wrong, but there's other parks, Schiff Park and Morningside Park, Jackie Robinson Park, that don't get the attention that they need, and would really be at a fraction of the money that we're spending on Central and Riverside, become gems, even more of the gems that they already are. And lastly, historic preservation. So there's a great deal of emphasis on preserving things in Lower Manhattan or south of 125th Street, but you get north of 125th Street, it's like history doesn't exist up here, and that's absurd. We have churches and buildings, we have a stop on the Underground Railroad that we should be preserving, not destroying. These are part of our cultural heritage, and we should be doing everything we can to keep them, not lose them just because we can get a few bucks or we can get a few affordable housing units. We're destroying part of our heritage on the altar of convenience, and I would try to oppose that as well. I just want to thank both President Lois Penny and Sean Farrow today, and the club itself for providing this opportunity to speak with you all. I know this is going to be we're still sort of 5.5 months into it, so we still got a lot of time to go, but I'm deeply grateful for a chance to talk to you all and to answer your questions, and I look forward to working with you, hopefully with your support for the City Council District 7. Thank you again so much, and again to my colleagues who are up here today, great to see you as well. Thank you again.
Thank you. Ms. Stacy Lynch.
Thank you, Sean. I'm going to keep my closing remarks short and very sweet. One of my colleagues mentioned earlier in the conversation that we have a honeymoon stage, right? And I disagree, excuse me. We do not have a honeymoon stage. Someone that worked in city government during the pandemic, and to be honest, one of the reasons why I didn't jump into this race earlier was because I felt like I could not leave city government given the needs that our communities from Upper Manhattan, the West Side, Washington Heights, Southeast Queens, Brooklyn, communities of color, under-resourced communities really needed a voice in City Hall, and I was that voice. And so what I want to say to the club today is you need a council member that knows how to push when needed and knows how to push on the first day on the job. This pandemic, both the public health crisis and the economic pandemic, is not to be played with. And of all the candidates on this panel, I'm the candidate with the most experience and can get the ground running, hit the ground running on day one. I hope to have your support. And please, I will put my information in the group chat. I am a candidate that is about coalition building, and really understanding the needs of every resident in the community. And I want to talk to each and every one of you. Take care.
Thank you. Ms. Lena Melendez.
I also want to thank Lois Penny, president of the club, and Sean Farrow and the club itself for inviting me to participate in this forum. I am an ordinary citizen. I'm from here. I've lived in this area, in the district, all up and down, Upper West Side, Harlem, Washington Heights. You know, these are my stomping grounds, and I love my district. I don't like what's happening to it, and I don't like what's been happening to it. And I promise you that I will fight with tooth and nail to get some of those things corrected. The issue, I didn't have a chance to talk about the issue of RAD and NYCHA. You know, I would call for a stop work order for non-emergency repairs. They're creating all kinds of dangerous situations for residents right now. You know, there's got to be a change in the way that New York City does planning. The Department of City Planning has to stop relying exclusively on zoning. We can't do the top down approach anymore. We have got to go we got to get the community input. And that's not happening in the ULIP process. And that's not happening, you know, in these, you know, I went through it. I've gone to rezonings in other areas all throughout the city. I fought tooth and nail against the inward rezoning. That stuff it's bullshit, you know, pardon my French, but it's just caca, you know. We need to make a change in that. And you know what? If you want someone that's not gonna sell out, because I cannot be bought, right? I stay true to my values. You got that in me.
Thank you. Mr. Ortega.
How much time do I have, Sean?
2 minutes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So usually in other parts of the district, well, let me start with this. I have not moved around in this district. I was born and raised in West Harlem on 134th Street between Broadway and Amsterdam. And my connection to this part of the district, Hamilton Heights and Manhattanville, is more unique than the other candidates. And because it's allowed me to share the burdens of the people in this community. And I'm not saying anything against anyone that doesn't live in this particular community or has moved in here some time ago, but the benefit that has allowed me to be here is that I've seen things, I've been a part of things. Not that I've just been a bystander, I've actively participated in this community in organizing. When the supermarket went up in flames in Manhattanville, I was in this Democratic Club's office, letting people in as a safe haven when it went to pieces in flames. When 3333 lost access to their pumps and they didn't have water, At 1, 2 o'clock in the morning when I worked in state government, I was there with the emergency maintenance crew from the city, making sure that it would get back. When we would have gunshots and shootings, gang related and drugs, I was there with, cure violence organizations. All this to say is that if any part of it, if any neighborhood in this district were to pick a candidate that really shares their suffrage, their lived experiences, that would be me. And I'm going to try something new. I learned this from Marty. I'm going to shout out the endorsements that I have, but my endorsements are a bit different. Honest to God, I don't have a lot of elected officials outside of the district, but I have people power endorsements. I have small business owners that are struggling and those that have closed that are supporting me. I have NYCHA residents, cure violence advocates in the district, tenant associations, block associations, housing advocates, immigrants, because this is a diverse district, LGBTQ leaders, veterans from Manhattan Valley, Hamilton Heights, and Washington Heights, teachers and those that are retired, nurses, case managers, college students, teenagers, and our youth. I believe if some people have mentioned they have a grassroots campaign, then we are literally cutting the grass. And I believe that with the people in this district supporting me and as validators, I will be able to win this. But again, ranked choice voting allows you to vote for more than one person. So I urge everyone in this club and all the viewers, if I am your preferred, great, let me be your one. Go with a Dan, go with a Stacy, go with a Marty. But if I'm not your favorite, for whatever reason, you don't like my beard, you don't like my policy, but you like some of my policy, vote for me number 2. I'll take it. And I'm sure everyone here is going to work hard, not only for your vote, but for your trust. Thank you so much. And please check out my policy at OrtegaNYC.com. God bless.
Thank you very much. I want to extend a great deal of gratitude on behalf of West Harlem's Progressive Democratic Club to all the candidates for joining us today. Thank you, Marty Alec Cummings, Lena Melendez, Corey Ortega, Stacy Lynch, and Dan Cohen. Thank you so much. Wish you all the best on the campaign trail as we continue. The primary is set for June 22nd. The deadline to register to vote is Friday, May 28th, and early voting begins Saturday, June 12th. The deadline to request absentee ballot is June 15th, and the general election is November 2nd. Please, please, please get out the vote. Make sure that everybody you know is registered to vote. If you have any issues, you can always reach out to the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club or any of these candidates here. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on this Saturday.